Welcome to HIT Podcast, H.I.T, Human Resources, Insurance, and Technology. I'm your host, Toby Kennedy. As we do every week, we are dropping into your feed with what I hope are bite-sized, digestible, well-curated, interesting conversations going on in the space. This week's episode is brought to you by Montage Insurance Solutions. And without any further ado, I want to bring on my friend, Russell. Russell, thank you so much for joining us, first of all.
Absolutely. This is great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man, right on. So Russell is in human resources, is a client, is just a great mind, and I feel like we've kind of had some really fun conversations along getting to know one another. Actually, a friend of the show, you may remember him from a way back Wednesday last year at the floor of the California HR conference, and kind of throughout our chats and getting to know one another, coming on the heels of May being Mental Health Awareness Month, and then June being Men's Health Awareness Month, and how men's health and mental health can be so tied together. It's a topic that you and I have chatted a bit about, and it's a topic that you have some thoughts on. So it's kind of nice to be able to heat up the cameras and maybe just kind of have a bit of a conversation about men's mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate coming on here and being able to speak about this. Like you said, it is near dear to my heart because it's something that, for my entire life, I've dealt with mental health issues and learning how to function and everything like that. And I think there's so many people that they won't look at themselves in that way, or they're afraid to, or they think it's weak. And so, the main thing I want to get out of this is for people to just take a look. Yeah. Maybe talk to somebody, even if you're not sure. Talk to someone, let them, help you work out your mind.
Yeah, I think that one of the analogies I'd heard someone use was sort of like having a personal trainer, where it's like, I don't care how much you know about fitness, and I don't care how in shape or out of shape you are. If everybody had a personal trainer, they'd get a little bit better fitness-wise, maybe a little bit of a form check, maybe someone even to kind of get you accountable, get you to the gym a little more often. And if you can kind of put therapy in that same light, it's sort of like nobody doesn't need to have these conversations or make sense of some of their thoughts. I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I started therapy very early on. I was about 13. I had depression, anxiety, and that age is really something where it starts to come out, and it did for me. I started therapy, and don't get me wrong, I've that's quite a few years. There's good ones and there's bad ones, and you have to understand yourself and what you want to get out of it, as you go along, because it may take you 5 times to find a good therapist, or, you just don't vibe, and you keep trying. And so many people will just give up. They'll think that's what therapy is.
I agree. And obviously it's anecdotal, but in my experience, I've seen that as a real hurdle. People, as you said, they see a person or two that, whether the person themselves wasn't great at their job, because every job is a spectrum of quality, or even just not the right fit maybe for that person. And as you said, you kiss 2 or 3 frogs and you just think there's no princess. I'm out of this sort of a thing. It's I now understand what therapy is, and therapy's not for me.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what people think it is. And it's terrible because, in America, I think one of the biggest issues we have is mental health. It's not looked at as a medical thing, where, to me it is. It's hand in hand with cancer or, 100%. Anything else. And it's something people need to stop thinking it's weak and stop, putting labels on it. Or, somebody might say, oh, that person's autistic, so they're mentally unstable and can't live a life. I know plenty of autistic people that, you would never know. Yeah. So it's getting both sides to understand, somebody with mental health that just, feels weak in that, and the people that may think they don't have it, but might have it, and they put you down, and kind of circling back around to men's mental health, men's suicidal rate is much higher than women's. And, it's a stigmatism that if you go down that road of mental health and, you're a little softer than other men and that you're weak. And, men don't want to be weak. I don't want to be seen as weak,
right.
And I don't see it as weak anymore. For many years, I really did, and it hindered my progress as well. So,
do you think there's been a shift in national dialogue? Do you think it's a mix of that plus your own journey, or why do you say I don't see it that way anymore?
I think in the beginning, it was so looked down upon, so you have a mental health issue, you should be in a psych ward.
Right.
We've come, so far literally in the last 30 years, and, we're making progress as a country, but, you take 2 steps forward and 3 steps back at times. And
sure. And one thing that came into my mind is you're a current practicing high-level HR professional at a large organization with dozens and dozens and dozens of locations and thousands of people. Like, you are a central figure currently, and you're like, hey, I'm going to put this on the internet, right? And so I think even one thing, I'd be curious to hear you say, like, what you think with your HR hat on, what can listing HR practitioners do to advance this conversation, but also just to herald you as one where you're like, but yeah, I have employees of mine that are going to watch me sit here and be vulnerable enough to say, it's not weak. I'm not weak, and neither are you. Like, go ahead. Like, I think even just putting your hand up and having the conversation is a big first step, but kind of want to throw that to you.
Yeah. So, my personal example in this industry is HR is maybe a little bit easier for somebody like me because you're a lot more compassionate and you have a lot more empathy for people. And that goes hand in hand with human resources. And, a lot of that I think has kind of gone away from this type of industry. With AI and everything, it's getting a lot less personable. And that's something we need to keep in the industry and keep, the professionals looking at this.
The human touch staying in human resources?
Yeah, exactly. It's business partner is great. I came from operations. I understand all that. But where's the human aspect in that, and that's what you need. You need to be able to be there for your employees and have those hard, awkward conversations, Not a lot of people want to talk about it, and not many people are willing to unless you ask the right questions. And I think for HR professionals, that's what you have to do. You have to be open, you have to be empathetic, and you have to really watch body language, as weird as that sounds. Is you can learn a lot from somebody, because
sure can.
When you have depression, anxiety, you mask it.
Yeah. I wonder, is there an intersection between, all of what we're talking about and kind of being the company's gatekeeper of leaves? Like, you're the one that keeps the leaves, sort of a thing, right?
Yeah, you have to look at every individual differently and their lifestyle and their possible needs. And if somebody needs to take a leave for mental health, I'm all in for that. It's just the same as if you need to take a leave to help your mom that's sick or your dad that's sick. You're sick.
Yeah.
You need to get yourself help. It's. I know I threw out cancer earlier, and we've talked about this. Or I was diagnosed last year with kidney cancer and had surgery and everything. And it was. I wasn't not feeling good, but I lost a ton of weight.
Sure.
And that was instantly something where got to get help.
Yeah.
Because something physically is not right with me.
Right.
That's how it needs to be with all things, and how we need to approach mental health as this is a physical disease, and this is one of the biggest diseases in America that's hindering us.
Sure.
And a lot has to do with the way we approach it and treat it as a society.
What did your journey look like on the mental health side?
It's been a long up and down journey. I won't get into real deep specifics because we don't have that kind of time. But, like I said earlier, I was diagnosed early at 13 with depression and kind of went into anxiety a little bit. And I really struggled, with that throughout high school and early adulthood. Was on medication for many years during, up till about mid-20s or so. And don't know why I got off it. Was off medication for quite a few years. But, a lot of people that have mental health issues have a lot of, self-medicating issues as well. And that was something I struggled with for many years, starting way back at 13 and, going up and I don't know what really snapped in me to where I thought, okay, this isn't healthy. This isn't right. And this isn't, helping myself mentally or my family mentally. And I quit drinking, quit everything, got help, really been working. That was a little earlier on, but in the last 5 years or so, I've been really, really working on, my mental health and getting right, not using.
Which is a heck of a time, by the way, to be like, hey, I'm going to drill down on my mental health. Like, also the world's going to fall apart.
Yeah, it was. And honestly, I think maybe that's what really kind of pushed me over is, being in human resources during the pandemic was, I'm surprised I have hair still. It was, you never knew what was happening in an hour or two from there.
Yes. Current and best data or whatever was the expression we used over and over again.
Yeah, exactly. And the new norm. And
oh gosh.
I think with the thought of the new norm and everything, mental health was top of my mind for my employees. And towards the end of the year, I think with everything going on, that's where I started going. And mentally, I think with stopping drinking, I almost hit like a rock bottom with my mental health, and it is affecting my family greatly. And they had to step in and, tell me, hey, you're down that road. Yeah. And that's when I really, really started getting help and that journey. And I'm still working on it, recently.
Everyone is.
Yeah.
To an extent.
Yeah. Everybody should.
Sure.
To every extent.
That's right. Yeah.
But yeah, I've been dealing with it, trying to figure out kind of where is it stemming from, chemical imbalance, that kind of stuff. And I was recently diagnosed with ADHD, which, with ADHD, a lot of symptoms are depression, anxiety, it mirrors a lot. Yeah. So, my current journey is kind of focusing on ADHD, and what I can do with that and kind of, get off some of the things that I'm on and streamline and kind of start healing that way, or I don't know, healing or understanding. So it's still 30 years later, still a long journey, and it's morphed into so many different ways and it's so many different understandings of your mind and everybody else's that's around you, because you're thinking about that quite a bit.
You are, and I think you're almost doing it, or I could say for myself, you're kind of doing it regularly but under the surface, and all the while achieving some version of success, right? And for you, it's like you said, hey, working my way through operations and then into human resources, large companies, successful roles, to where you might not necessarily, depends on how far on the outside you are, right? Because you talked about, hey, my family had to pull me aside and say, yo, the road, but maybe someone on the outside is just looking at you kicking butt career-wise, right? And so maybe not having clarity that people might be grappling with this at all apparently successful levels.
Yeah. So, like I said earlier, it's so important to watch and observe people, because, people that have depression, anxiety, living day to day, you learn to mask it. You learn to hide it and live a different life. Yeah. For example, Robin Williams.
Great example.
He's hilarious. He's always funny. He's always wanting to make people laugh. And that there is a big thing with people that have depression and anxiety is they know how it feels. So they're always trying to make other people
Reminds
happy.
me of a good joke to tell you, Russell. Yeah, no, I hear you. There was a commercial, I think it was like an English commercial, but it was two buddies that kept getting together for a soccer game. and it was all about like men's mental health. And one of them was really cheering for the team, and the other kind of seemed a bit blue. And they show back up to next week and next week and next week, and always the one guy cheering and the other guy seeming a bit dour. And then it cuts to like the dour guy showing up, and the other guy wasn't there because he's the one that ended up, taking his life, sort of thing. Because you never know; it's not always the face you might look and see. So I think that the masking of it, and maybe to bring this back around to human resources professionals, but the masking of it mixed with your comment about kind of really reading body language. So whether or not someone is showing it through body language, which we should maybe pick up on, or showing it in different ways, which we could maybe also hopefully pick up on. Curious if you have thoughts, like as one HR practitioner who, and maybe I'm putting words in your mouth saying this, but as one HR practitioner that would say, hey, mental health awareness, and particularly men's mental health, is important to me. What might you tell an HR practitioner out there?
Just be open.
Yeah.
Be open, ask the right questions, and listen.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is just to listen. You don't even have to make a comment. You just listen. And that goes so far with so many people. That goes so far with me.
Yeah.
Because we're usually the ones that are listening, and we don't share our voice because we're afraid to. We've masked. And so just being open to listening to other people's issues and not trying to fix them, but just having a good conversation about, their thought process, where they're going, why they're going there, and what you can do to help them.
Yeah.
Never assume that A, B, and C is going to help this person. You got to get the feedback from them.
Yeah.
And so, that's hard thing with it is there's no cure. There's no absolute diagnosis.
Yeah, right.
It's a combination of a lot of different things, and that's where you just have to watch people's, their practices, what they do. And if they're kind of a little off, your team as a manager, your team.
Yeah.
My boss knows me.
Yeah.
She knows when I'm a little off. So,
Yeah.
And that's what's great is having that type of relationship, especially at work, to be able to help with that. And that's, as an HR professional, what we need to do for everybody in our company.
Yeah, and maybe I'm taking a step further, so rein me in if I'm going too far, but helping managers, because when you say you need to know your team, I think HR needs to know HR's team, but you can't be in every room at once. And I wonder about just the idea of helping managers to be aware of their teammates and, to the extent possible. I'm not asking someone to be a clinician, but to the extent possible, their ebbs and flows, and maybe like putting it on HR's radar. It's like, hey, listen, it's kind of performance issue E, but it's really also something I want to treat with some care and love, and maybe bringing that to your attention. Yeah,
I think at least for us and my company, our managers for the most part do that.
Yeah.
They very much so care for their employees, and they want the best for them. So if something's happening, performance-wise is going down, something like that, they usually will have a conversation about, hey, how's it going?
Right.
How's everything? And there's times where it's at a point where, hey, Russell, can you come over here and talk to this person? And
approach matters, right?
Yeah. And I've absolutely done that. I've driven 2 hours away in traffic just to talk with somebody for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Being willing to do that makes the difference.
Yeah, and it's not easy for you because you guys are multi-site. And so when you're out there telling HR people to put an arm around the shoulder, it's not like you're just saying, I'm walking down the hall. Like you said, I drove 2 hours to have a 10-minute conversation. And I think that when I mentioned the manager thing and your comment back is, I believe our company does a pretty good job of that. My first thought is, well, it kind of starts. HR is the heartbeat of the company. And so starts with you. And you mentioned your wonderful, lovely boss earlier as well. So the whole department and all of your colleagues, I've perceived to be kind of cut from that cloth. And I think that it can make a difference in company culture.
Yeah, absolutely can. We're not necessarily the heart and push of culture. We definitely have a huge hand in it. It starts from the top down, and I think we just have a very compassionate company. You know, from the very top, you know, empathy is something that is seen. And so, you know, having an open floor to be able to talk about, you know, is definitely helped us. And I think, you know, having those conversations with managers do as well. And, you know, never shy away from these kind of conversations. They're awkward. They're, you know, weird and quirky, and you never know what's going to come out of it.
Squiggly wiggly.
Yeah. And so, you know, just like I said earlier, listen with an open mind and, you know, listen to them on how you can help them.
And I think that there's aspects of lip service and box checking, and then there's aspects of really doing these things. And I think the doers of the world are people that are out there. And I just watch you and your wonderful company and your tremendous success. And in my head, I'm thinking, this is someone who's encouraging people to maybe be a little bit vulnerable and maybe talk to their, you know, staff and employees just as a service, who, by the way, like, you want to talk about leading by example. You're like, I'll do it on camera. Like, I'm out here being vulnerable on the internet to tell people it's not that hard to show a little bit of your rear end and go do it with your employees, because you know, it makes a difference. It can make a difference. It could save a life, not to get too grandiose, but could, you know? And I applaud the heck out of you for the message itself and for being brave enough to come on and deliver that message in person. Yeah.
Not going to lie, the drive here, I was second guessing every second of it.
Every red light. Never mind, I'll just turn around.
Exactly. And even now, you know, I doubt so much always in my head. And that's been a big struggle for me to get out there to do this kind of stuff. And it's so important to me to do this, not for me, but for others that are afraid. You know, I hope that this message gets to at least one person. And that helps one person. And if it helps more than that, awesome. But, you know, it starts small and it makes it big. And that one person can share and hopefully, you know, things get a little bit easier for people and a little more understanding.
Yeah. And the more dudes, so to speak, that sit around and say, it's not weak, it's not a problem, we can go ahead and talk about this stuff. This might be a little bit like inside baseball, but we're obviously looking at the cameras. My uncle is here from Australia, and this is the one topic he was like, I want to sit behind the camera. I want to listen to this because it's important to me too. It means something to me. I've spent some of my life doing this stuff, right? So I think guys are having these conversations at the very least in their own hearts, and then kind of maybe amongst super trusted guys. And it's like, okay, well, it doesn't just need to be in that level of privacy. You can drag this stuff out in the open so that everybody can hear dudes say, you know, you're good, man. The doubter inside of you, the demons roosting, they're not necessarily unique to you, although they are difficult. And you know, it's okay that they're there, and let's talk about it. Let's do something about it. Let's mitigate. Let's take steps, I think.
Yeah. You know, I feel like there's a weird gap between like maybe your teens to mid-30s where a man's a man, you know?
You're so insecure. You don't know anything, and you don't know that it's okay to say, I don't know. And
yeah, exactly. And as I get older, these conversations seem to come up a little bit more. And as I share kind of my stories, I've had, you know, other older men share their stories that, you know, may have never have thought about it or thought about getting help, that have lived their entire life with, you know, terrible anxiety. And you'd never know because of the masking, but you know, now that they're talking about it, they're able to analyze.
That's up market in age, and even down market in age, like you talked about a second ago. I was talking to someone the other day who she was explaining that her like 19 or 20-year-old son felt like a failure because he's not a millionaire yet, because social media and cursed it. I know obviously we're on it and using it, but cursed its downsides and its highlight reel, and the idea that it could get into a 19 or 20-year-old boy's head that he's a failure because he's not a millionaire like these other guys. And you're just like, my God, like, talk about the need to have realistic conversations to counterbalance the absolute garbage and bots and AI that is not real life. Real life is much different than that, you know? And so if we can get together and say out loud, like guy to guy, you know, this is real life. The real life is that anxiety. Real life is that doubter. Real life is not succeeding. Real life is failures, you know, and getting back up and doing those things. Man, I appreciate the heck out of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for being on. I feel like this is in a special episode of Boy Meets World or whatever. But no, man, I'm grateful to have these topics. And I think that when we're coming off of, you know, again, May, Mental Health Awareness Month, June, Men's Health Awareness, to kind of cap the month with a brave and wonderful soul sitting in here talking about what I personally think is an incredibly important topic. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you to Rula, TrueHue, Excel Health, Montage Insurance Solutions. Folks help keeping the lights on. Thank you guys for watching every week. We're blessed to be here. Join us next week. Join us every week. And until next week, make this the best weekend.